these are the early government philosopher notes. The first philosopher we're going to look at is Voltaire. Voltaire was his pen name, and he lived in the early to mid 1700s and was from France. Voltaire was imprisoned quite often because he did not always agree with the French government, and during this time they were a monarchy and did not like being insulted by him. He did not believe in the inheritance kind of monarchy. What he did believe in was an enlightened monarchy where the king would inherit but had to be taught to be a good ruler. In addition to that, he saw the aristocracy as ineffective, and he definitely did not trust democracy because he believed in this thing called the idiocy of the masses and thought that the people really could not make a good government. He was very against war, and his beliefs in civil rights heavily influenced our Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, press, and the religion. He had a lot of beliefs in personal freedoms. One of Voltaire's most famous quotes was, "I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." That, along with his beliefs in religious tolerance for all religions, respect of all men, the rights of all men, and equality, no torture, those sorts of things show up in our Bill of Rights today. Our second philosopher is Rousseau, who actually died in the same year that Voltaire did. Rousseau is also French, and he's best known for having many children. He had 5 children, or at least 5 that we know of, but he really wasn't a very good parent. Rousseau abandoned his family and his children, and as far as we can tell, they all died in the streets. So that goes to tell you, you don't have to be a good person to have some good ideas, at least not about government. He and Voltaire were essentially mortal enemies. They absolutely hated one another, and they had some very different ideas, and that led into it. He was also a Calvinist, which means he believed in predestination. So regardless of the actions you do in your life, whether or not you go to heaven is determined before you're even born. So your actions don't actually play into that. That can be reflected into some of what he shows in his beliefs. He believed that the state of nature was primitive without law or morality. Eventually, man will be competitive with other man. It's kind of survival of the fittest idea, that you're not there to help each other, but rather to do your best. He believed we need government to keep people in line. So government was important to him for that reason. So he came up with this idea of a social contract where the people follow the rules and the government keeps the people safe. It's a contract between the people and the government, with both having their own ideas and their own responsibilities to it. And that idea was carried in by our founding fathers into our Constitution. Our third philosopher we'll look at is Montesquieu, or Baron Montesquieu. He was a part of the upper classes in France in the late 1700s or late 1600s, mid to 1700s. He did die about 20 years ahead of our other 2 philosophers we've looked at. He died prior to the American Revolution. An interesting note about him, in addition to being upper class, he was wealthy. He also went to college, which very few people during that time did. That set him apart from everyone else. He is very well known. During his life, he wrote this book called The Persian Letters that was really a satire of Paris society. And it became very popular, and everyone thought that he was hilarious when really he was making fun of them. On a side note, he did die blind, but he wrote and was very prolific during his time period. He believed in the law of primogeniture, so the firstborn inheriting and being the one in charge. But some other beliefs he had were very different. He believed that women could run the government. But he wasn't quite as forward-thinking as we'd like to think, because he didn't think they could run a household, but just the government. he believed that slavery was wrong, and in the early 1700s thought that it should be ended. So a very forward-thinking idea. His major belief that we're very familiar with today in America is the idea of the separation of powers. So you guys are familiar with the three branches: legislative, executive, judicial. That idea comes from Montesquieu. Our fourth philosopher we're going to look at is John Locke. If you look at his date, you'll notice that John Locke is an earlier time period. He died in 1704, and he's from Great Britain. These things set him apart from our French Enlightenment philosophers. Like I said before, they did get some of those influences from their time period, but Locke also influenced Rousseau and Voltaire. He was an earlier philosopher and brought ideas out that started the French Enlightenment kind of society, accepting these people, looking into new ideas and trying to change things. Locke was also different in that he went to college. He went to Oxford. Very different than others in his time period, again. And Locke was very focused on monetary ideas, monetary policy, accumulation of property, economics. That was really a focus for him. That ends up being reflected in some of his ideas and philosophies. He believed that all people are born good. You're born a blank slate, tabula rasa. So you're born with nothing, and you accumulate actions over time. So everyone's equal, everyone's independent and good when they're born, and things change over time. That you trust your senses, you should experiment and do empirical science. Use your senses to find out if things are right or not. So he wanted to take these ideas and put them all together, and through that he believed that sometimes revolution is required. It's not just a right people have, it is sometimes a responsibility that people have. And one of the other big ideas, our founding fathers used the revolution idea to justify the American Revolution, but they also took the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The original idea that Locke had written in his writings was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, because he believed in economics. So Jefferson later took that and changed it, and we know that phrase very well today. Our last two philosophers are actually two people that you're probably a little bit more familiar with than these others. The first is Thomas Jefferson, and I hope you know him since he was one of our presidents. Jefferson, though, had a lot to do with the building up of our Constitution and of our government. So he helped with the development of that. Jefferson went to the College of William and Mary in Virginia in the mid-1700s. He studied math and philosophy. And here he really learned about John Locke and his philosophies about government. And in fact, he is known to have called John Locke, Isaac Newton, and Francis Bacon the three greatest men who ever lived. So he really loved Locke and Locke's ideas. And so you're going to see that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness being Jefferson's take on Locke's ideas. You really are going to see those reflected, and Jefferson is why we were able to do that. He founded the idea of republicanism in America, and republicanism not as the Republicans and the Democrats, but actually republicanism as the idea that we need a limited federal government. It's about the republic. We limit the president to 2 terms. We limit the president's power. We allow states to have more power. Although he didn't get the 2-term president piece in, he's the only president who never vetoed a bill, even though he served 8 years as president. In addition, Jefferson really believed in a lot of individual rights, not just states' rights. Things like people should have the right to property and the right to be safe in their property, and the government can't take it. People should be able to choose their own religion. The state should not put a religion on people, and laws should not be based off of religion. Jefferson is also known for being the author of the Declaration of Independence and was influenced by John Adams and Ben Franklin, among many others, in his writings. One of the reasons that he did this was because he had good handwriting. So he had a lot of good ideas, but it wasn't just his ideas that went into it. And Jefferson is the third president of the United States. So between republicanism and three, see, George Bush is showing you it's number 3. Jefferson was the best. At least that's what I'm going to say that means. Our final philosopher is James Madison, who also becomes president of the United States later on. Madison, a little interesting fact about him, he came from a poorer family. It was a very large family, 12 children, and only 7 lived to adulthood. Because of this, he also had to pay for his own education, and so that meant that he didn't get to go to college like Jefferson did. He came from a slightly different background. He started off early on. He was a very large supporter. He was a Federalist and a supporter of a strong national government and a supporter of the Constitution. He helped Alexander Hamilton write the Federalist Papers in 1787, promoting the passage of the Constitution, explaining how this would help protect states, because we'd have a national government that could declare war or protect us in invasion, stop rebellions. However, he didn't support the Bill of Rights because he thought the Constitution took care of those issues. So early on he didn't, but when he realized Jefferson and the other anti-federalists who supported states' rights would not pass the Constitution without a Bill of Rights, Madison actually wrote the majority of them. He wrote 12 different ideas, 10 of which made it into the Constitution as our Bill of Rights. So then, of course, he became a supporter of it since he wrote it. He's also known as the father of our Constitution. You like that? Darth Vader, your father. So he's known as the father of the Constitution for writing the Bill of Rights and for how hard he worked to get the Constitution itself ratified. So he was willing to do whatever it took to get this government that he thought would be a good government in place. This final slide or picture. So Madison ended up being kind of two-faced. He wrote the Federalist Papers, but when he was in Congress, he sided with the anti-federalists limiting strong federal government. Now, at that time, he's representing states. Then he becomes president. So he's one side, then the other side. Then he becomes president, and he supports a strong federal government to build up the Army and Navy during the War of 1812. So again, he's back to being a Federalist. So we're going to call him two-faced because he did change based on what met his needs best. So that concludes your notes for the 6 philosophers you need to be very familiar with for this unit. Make sure that you ask Ms. Richardson or Mr. Martinez if you have any questions or if there's anything in the notes you need clarified or more detail about. We'll see you in class tomorrow.